being recorded and will subsequently be available to the public. Could I ask for the Sederunt and any apologies, Claire?
Thank you, Chairman. We have 3 apologies this morning, one from Councillor Geddes, Councillor McGregor and Councillor Ogilvie, and we have Councillor Nicholson here substituting for Councillor Ogilvie.
Okay, thanks, Claire. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Okay, can we move on to item number 3? We've got Don Lynch here today from the DWP. Don's going to give us a presentation on the Universal Credit implementation progress and update us. To yourself, Don, thanks. including me, right, okay. Because we are recording this meeting, but it only, not switched on, okay. I'm switched on, yeah. Can we switch them on? Yeah?
Sorry, I was just going to say we do actually have a criteria for domestic emergencies. So things like death of relatives, friends, children being ill, all that would be a domestic emergency. And then there is a criteria virtually for every other reason that someone might come in late. Just as an example, I've been an advisor for a long time and Dawn's been in a different role. If someone was due to sign in the old days of signing, if they come in and they're late, we would actually ask them to come in and give them a direction to come in the following fortnight at a specific time. Now, that letter only relates for that following signing. So if they don't come into that signing, then that would be sanctioned. If they do come into that signing and they're late the following fortnight, we've got to issue that letter again for the next time. So it's not just, you do hear people saying, I was 5 minutes late and I get sanctioned. Actually, regulations wouldn't allow us to do that. There will be a procedure we would have to follow. So someone's late, it's almost like a warning, and there's a letter to say that you must be in time the next time, but it does only stand for that next time.
I don't want to divert away from universal credit. Why has there been such a substantial increase in sanctions?
I don't have Dumfries and Galloway's figures, but certainly across the district, the sanctions has actually come down quite a lot since claimant commitment came in. Because with the introduction of claimant commitment, job seekers agreements, yes, we were expecting claimants to do lots less, but sometimes, quite often actually, it would be a case of, oh, you last worked as a labourer, so I'll take it you need to work as a labourer, you're going to look for work as a labourer now. Whereas under claimant commitment, that would be a full discussion as to, well, you were last working as a labourer. Is that the kind of work you're looking for now? Is that the kind of work you think you could find? Because to be perfectly honest, that person might never want to go back to labour. But we certainly can forward you Dumfries and Galloway sanction figures. But if they mirror any other part of our district, the sanctions has come down.
Done in recent weeks, but I'm talking about in the last couple of years, it certainly went significantly up. And I think what's concerning is the number of successful appeals, if you like, which would suggest that the original sanction might not have been appropriate. But can I just ask on, you've talked about the agreed claimant commitment, and the language is very much agreement, so presumably that's an agreement between the claimant and the DWP. I mean, what flexibility is there within what's contained within that claimant commitment?
Can I ask on if it's a private landlord, for example, you know, and there is sanctions that private landlords take usually, if they're behind on rent by a month, then they get charged a certain amount on top of that for the late payment or whatever. And if they can't manage the 2 months, then that obviously goes up even more. And you said it would get paid directly, but what happens to the, yeah. It's just that after a certain time, obviously, then, you know, they might then be homeless, you know, if they're not, you know, personal circumstances, and they haven't got anything left to actually pay off anything that would elsewhere, then, you know, then things can be put in place. Is there anything in place that protects them? But can you force that on them? Yeah, you force that on them.
When if a landlord contacts us and basically asks for a managed payment, and if they're highlighting the person is under threat of eviction, there should be a decision made within a 24-hour turnaround. And it's highly unlikely that we would make the decision not to make the managed payment. We kind of asked for some statistical information as to how many managed payments were turned down, and basically we're told at the minute there was very limited numbers of people who were turned down.
Don. That was very comprehensive. Questions from members, Jane?
I'm interested in the business of paying only to one member of the household, and I can see that occasionally that might be very difficult. Do you, particularly, I saw that you had issues of domestic violence might be one of the circumstances in which you change things, and I can see that as being a particular problem. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Any other members? Rob?
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, it was just a basic one, I suppose. The presentation is very helpful. Will that be able to be circulated to other members that might be interested in this thereafter? I think it'd probably be quite useful for them.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we certainly can arrange for the presentation to be circulated to all members of the subcommittee not present, but we can circulate it to all elected members.
That would certainly be helpful. Can I just ask, Don, obviously the start date is 27th of April. What's the current anticipated numbers you've got in Dumfries and Galloway, and how many applications do you anticipate start to come? I think you said there was half a dozen in West Dumbartonshire. What's your anticipation of the numbers in Dumfries and Galloway? And obviously the DWP have said there won't be any changes to the criteria, at least between now and April 2016. What sort of potential expansion in the criteria are you looking at from 2016 onwards?
Yeah, and currently we haven't, none of the live sites, even the one that rolled out on the 29th of April 2013, hasn't yet moved on to employment support allowance customers, income support allowance customers. So they've not even been trialled yet. So it should be quite a bit further down the line. So it should always be that claimant who's unemployed, available and looking for work.
Jane, yeah.
Just a final one. How do you monitor your own staff with respect to fairness on sanctions? How is that done?
Basically, just now, there was an Oakley review, and the recommendations from this Oakley review were taken on in full. And what actually happens now in local office is every case that's prepared to go for sanction is looked at by the manager within that office, every single case. 100% of the cases will be fully checked. They will then go to an independent decision maker. So you could have, in Dumfries and Galloway, you could probably have 50 or 60 advisors putting things forward for a decision. But to ensure consistency, you'll probably only have maybe 1 or 2 people making the decision. Therefore, it should be pretty accurate that someone going up in different circumstances wouldn't get a different outcome. But before we actually sanction a person's claim, we need to make sure that we have all the evidence to put that forward. If that goes to the decision maker without that evidence, they'll make a favourable decision on the claimant's part.
Okay, if there's not any other questions, thank you very much indeed for the presentation and answering the questions. With members' agreement, I'm actually going to take item number 5 next, which is a follow-up paper, if you like, on the implementation of universal credit from the council's point of view, where we have from DWP here. So, members happy to do that? Okay, can we turn to the report then? Obviously, the report provides an update on the rollout of universal credit from the council's point of view. Can I ask John if there's anything?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing further to add, but obviously either myself or Lorna, who's the author of the report, would be happy to take any questions.
Okay, can I open up to members? Obviously, most of it, or a lot of it, was covered in the presentation. Do members have any questions? No? Okay, can we turn to the recommendations? We're happy to note the current position regarding the rollout of universal credit. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, members, can we turn to item number 4 on the agenda, which is confirmation of the discretionary housing payment allocation for 2015-16. There's obviously a very substantial reduction in the Scottish Government's allocation from 672,000 down to 104,000, with potentially a further 182,000 in towards the end of the year. This will mean obviously a shortfall in funding, and the report obviously outlines proposals to fill that shortfall and also to amend the current policy as a consequence of the reduced allocation. Can I ask John if he wants to add anything to the report?
Thanks, Chair. No, again, nothing further to add, but myself or Lorna would be happy to take any questions.
You can open up to members. Ronnie?
We're actually going back to a different criteria for awarding these funds. Can you tell us the difference? We're going back to the criteria we used before, which was less enhanced than the one we're using now, but when we're going back to that, and you know what kind of difference is.
Because of the reduced funds, we had quite a relaxed criteria where we could really take most applications and award where they fitted into the criteria of the scheme. Because of the reduced funds, what we're looking to do is go back to a financial assessment for non-size criteria for any non-bedroom tax poses policy intentions. We will fully cover them. But if it's not size-related restrictions, then we would do an income and expenditure assessment on applications and go back to looking to where there's a shortfall within their income doesn't meet their expenditures and they're having a shortfall in their housing benefit. So we're looking to apply that. We would go back for the ones that we haven't been able to award for this year, we'll go back and reassess based on that, where we have that information, and as the year goes on, see how that expenditure is actually going and how far we'll be able to meet within the reduced funds that we've got. So it's something we'd really need to monitor as we go.
Just on that, I know it's because of the reduction in funding, and we've got reserves that we're using it to try and mitigate some of the impact of that over the next 3 years. This is what we're being asked to do. But obviously, we're changing the criteria again. You know, we didn't put that criteria, the new criteria, in for nothing. You know, it obviously helped people, you know, have some kind of stability in their finances and that as well. But, and I know, you know, we'll be giving them money advice and things like that, but we did that before as well. I mean, what I'm saying is we didn't give them that money for nothing, but they will have an impact on these individuals. So what else are we doing apart from giving them money advice because of this reduction in funding? You know, what else are we doing and what else can we do?
I mean, what we'll do is, you know, as much as we can, we will look at benefit maximisation, make sure that they're getting, you know, the most income they possibly can, as well as providing money advice. After that, it would be, we would talk to landlords about housing advice, whether they're in the appropriate accommodation, whether there's an alternative. But we already know we're stretched in that. We don't have the number of one-bedroom properties or lower number of bedroom properties that's actually needed. So we are quite restricted as in how much we can do, other than provide advice or look for alternative for tenants and provide that assistance to them. I mean, we would commit to, we always have done, work closely with the RSLs and commit to continue to do that. But we are working within a very restricted area.
Jane?
Yes, I mean, we are dealing with a restricted amount of money, and do we actually monitor? You know, the difficulty is when you get to the bottom, to the 2 and 1 bedroom. That's where the difficulty is. But do we actually monitor to see if there are people who are in houses that maybe are 4 bedroom when the requirement, as the rules stand at the moment, suggests that they require 3? Do we actually monitor whether people are making an attempt to move, or do we not look at that?
We don't specifically monitor that. I think, given the last 2 years, we've had sufficient funding to meet the needs of people who are in, you know, accommodation that was larger than their assessed needs. We haven't kept that monitor. It's more a role probably for RSLs and landlords. You know, it's their accommodation, you know, to ensure they're aware that the scheme's there and in place, and obviously they're well aware of, you know, the potential of these restrictions. So it's not something internally we've monitored, albeit we have figures of people who are in receipt of housing benefit. We don't know those who are not in receipt of benefit that may be in different accommodation size.
Thanks, Chair. Just to add to that response from Lorna, it's probably more a housing issue rather than a Reverend Ben's issue. And what we've tried to do there is, in terms of the development of the Common Housing Register and the Common Allocations Policy, is look at making sure that the under-occupation points are appropriate to allow people the choice to move on. And we're going through a review of that policy at the minute. And there will be reports coming back to the Housing Subcommittee about the outcome of that review, just to test whether we've gauged those points at the correct point in the system, to try and maximise the ability for people who are potentially in properties that they're under-occupying to have a decent choice to move on to somewhere where they'll accept. And obviously it's in the best interests of ourselves and the RSLs to make best use of that stock. And it doesn't make sense for somebody who's in maybe a house with 2 or 3 spare bedrooms, who's willing to move, not to try and facilitate that move. And it's about striking that balance between dealing with those cases and dealing with homelessness and over-occupation and urgent medical needs. And it's about trying to strike the balance through the allocation process.
Any other members? Can I just add, the anticipated spend for this year for DHB is about 1.2 million, is that? Is that right? So effectively, what we're saying here in the recommendations is that we've got an anticipated spend in 2014-15 of 1.2 million. However, the budget for the following year, because we're taking the 371,000, dividing it over 3 years, the budget will just be basically 1.1 million. So the shortfall is effectively still around £100,000. And that's quite a, when you take into account the fact that about 900 odd thousand is purely for the bedroom tax, you know, that's a substantial reduction for people that are applying for DHP that are not affected by the bedroom tax. I mean, I'm quite, I have to say, I'm very nervous about that. You know, I know that we're saying we're tightening the criteria, but you know, to meet £100,000 shortfall is, you know, that's a big tightening, frankly, of the criteria for people not affected by the bedroom tax. So I have to say, I'm very nervous about this. I don't know if any other members share that view. The report does say that this will be monitored on a regular basis, and I think that's incredibly important. But this will mean that people who currently get DHP will either see a reduced amount, or some people will not get DHP in the future as a result of this change and this cut in funding. I don't know if any other members have got any other views on the on what we're being asked to consider.
I thought I'd switched off there. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, I take your point. I'm wondering how flexible we can be at this point. Clearly, we've got to be very careful at looking at something over 3 years. And money's only going to get tighter, I recognise that. But I'm slightly, I'm kind of twitchy, as I think you are, about the straight three-way split that we're being asked to divide up at this point. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can front load it and then revisit this. I mean, we have another 2 budgets. If we're looking at a projected 100k shortfall at this point, might it be a good idea to put that aside so that we simply know that at least this year is covered? Okay, we still have an issue of concern for forthcoming years. I wonder if it's something that we should consider. Possibly not one for today, I accept. It might be one that we can work through when we get the monitoring on this, which was the question I was going to ask. Just in terms of when we'll get, obviously I'm just back on the committee, when we'll get the update so that we can see how it's going. If we're actually heading towards the 1.2, if it's going to be less, if it's going to be more, of course, in which case we've got a real headache. I wonder if there's some degree of flexibility in there in terms of the 3-year division that we've set up. I understand exactly why it's been done, but if we're sitting looking at a projected figure, maybe we should be allocating, you know, notwithstanding that maybe gives us would give us a headache in future years. At least we would be more comfortable that this coming year was covered. I throw it out there as a possibility.
I suppose that the challenge is that how do we as members know how this is actually impacting? Because what we'll receive obviously is the number of applications, the total awards, you know, and I've no doubt the department will, you know, be conscious of the budget you've been set, and that's information we'll get. But how do we know how this is impacting on individuals? You know, in terms of, you know, individual circumstances. I don't ask about any specific individuals, but how do we know what the change is likely to be for particular examples? You know, we'll simply get the figures which we'll get in the monitoring report later on to say that this is the number of applications, this is the number of successful applications, this is the spend. But how do I know that somebody prior to the change of criteria that we're being asked effectively to agree here would have got X amount, and now they're only going to get X amount, and what that actual change is? How will we know really how this is impacting on individuals other than just purely getting the financial monitoring reports?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think probably what we can do, and I'll need to talk to the team about it, but in terms of the regular monitoring reports that you get at every Welfare Reform Subcommittee on Scottish Welfare Fund and DHP, we can maybe look at building in additional criteria, so you get more detail about potentially number of non-bedroom tax cases, how many have been applied, how many have been given full awards, how many have been given partial, what's the period over which the award's been given. We can probably build in some more information around that, just to give you a sense, certainly over the next couple of months, or the next couple of meetings about what the impact is on the reduction of the HP awards. And at that point, you might be better informed to make any longer-term decisions around the policy once you see it in action. I mean, there's no difficulty in members changing tack and maybe refining the policy through the financial year. It's not kind of set in stone in that way. But without that information, we're kind of guessing what the impact will be at this stage. We can certainly refine that information down. The monitoring reports up at the end of the report, at the end of this agenda. The future reports we can build in potentially much more detail for the non-bedroom tax DHP cases to give you that kind of intelligence in which to make any changes.
Jane?
Well, I mean, what we're doing here, I suppose, is front-loading the whole issue on the size criteria and the bedroom tax. I mean, you know, given what we've got, money that we've got, would we be better to say, well, you know, the average award is roughly it's about £9 a week, isn't it? If you work out about £9 a week. I mean, would we be better to put a little bit more money into the non-size criteria pot and take it that way?
Thanks, Chair. It's the funding that we're receiving, the additional top-up funding from the Scottish Government is conditional on using it against the bedroom tax mitigation specifically. So that flexibility isn't really there in terms of that bit of the funding. So we need to manage what's left.
Bit of a theme coming forward, isn't there?
Any other members? Okay. I suppose there are effectively two options. We take on board what John says about additional information and actually seeing how this would affect, but in order to get that information, you would effectively need to change the criteria today, see how it works, and then potentially change it back again, which is one option. The other option is that we maintain the existing criteria, but try to obtain further information in a future report as to how the change of criteria may impact on people, but I don't know how we would do that. Have to almost run, if you like, dummy applications. And I don't want to add massive burdens that you start assessing people based on two criteria and then give us that information in a month's time, see what we think. But I'll throw that out there as a potential option.
Yes, I think the problem we would have is we don't have the funds to commit. So what we'd probably be saying to applicants would be, we can pay it for the next month to see what that would be, and then we'd have to go back in and reassess all the claims, or, you know, or a month or 2 months till that money was spent, and then potentially saying to clients, you know, well, at the end of that 3 months, you may end up getting nothing because we've committed to some, to those who have already made a commitment to prior years, and it would just leave us no room for manoeuvre if we had no extra funding after that. I think administratively it would be very difficult, but you know, we could manage that. But I think from a tenant's point of view as well, it wouldn't give them any certainty, because all we could say is we're either going to pay it for a month, 2 months, and then review.
Into criteria in the past, though, we've effectively assessed somebody under the current criteria, and then we've agreed to pay them for 6 months, and then that continues. So even when we've changed the criteria in the past, those people that have been given a payment for 6 months, for example, we haven't changed their payment, have we? We've simply changed the criteria for new applications.
No, because in the past, we've got extra funds, so for the commitments we'd made, we went back and gave them extra money, where this way we're doing it inverse, we're committing, but then potentially not being able to go back and give them any more, or not being able to extend the award because we're not in a position financially to do so.
As a members, as to how you want to take this forward?
It's a position I don't think anybody wants to be in, you know, but because we've got to work within the reduced funding we're receiving. You know, it's death by 1,000 cuts if you want, because, you know, you can either take that decision now and try it with the same criteria, and then try and find out and work about, and then all of a sudden they've got nothing. Or we can try and work through it through this, what's on the table here, and do the best we can with it.
Okay. Members, Rob, sorry.
Well, I take on board what Ronnie's saying. I want to come back to the point that I suggested about the way in which we divide the 371. It would at least buy us a year.
The problem is that after that, if we had nothing left, then it would be a complete cut. You know, whereas, you know, we're probably buying more time by putting this over the 3 years. We can't second guess what's going to happen in the following year with funding and that. So, you know, I understand what you're saying about, you know, put it all there, but we'd have nothing left at the end up or less, and we'd need to make more drastic cuts.
There's also the concern that what you do when you're halfway through the year, you know, when somebody's getting that, or more than 6 months through the year, and somebody's getting a payment for a further 6 months, you're effectively going into a further year knowing that you're going to have to change the criteria. Okay. In the hands of members, do you wish to look at this again in a couple of months in terms of assess how the new criteria is working and to get some worked up examples, or Ronnie?
I don't think we've any choice but to do this, you know, go with the recommendations. We've got to obviously have a, you know, an eye on it, and I'm quite sure you will have anyway, you know, and see how it's going on that basis. And then there's no opportunity within a few months, if you want, even to change that if necessary, coming back here to see how it's working through.
How many applications are we likely to have? Not obviously the bedroom tax one, that's the vast majority of applications. That's about, I think, a couple of thousand applications. How many applications are we likely to have by the time we obviously we've got a meeting in June, 21st of June, I think. How many applications are we likely to have roughly by then? We'll be able to make a proper assessment of the impact.
What we've currently got based on last year's figures, I'm just having a quick look, there's just over 750 non-size criteria applications that we had last year. So while some of them may not still be in receipt of housing benefits, so we are probably looking somewhere between 600 and 700 applications that were awarded DHP last year. We only do, if we agree the criteria today, what we'll is review the ones that have previously had it to see if they meet the new criteria under an income and expenditure assessment. So over the next few months before the next committee, we'll look to review those applications. We will have new applications coming in undoubtedly, and they range anywhere between 80 and 100 a month. So we potentially could, you know, of the existing 600 and another couple of hundred on top of that.
Effectively, we're proposing to go back through all the existing applications and effectively review their funding. And that's how many roughly that are currently receiving payments. I mean, I know there's about 750 in the course of a year, but sometimes they get that for a certain period of time. But so how many applications are we going to go back through and potentially reduce their income?
I don't have the exact figure, but looking at that, I would say roughly about 500 or 600 to review.
That does make me very nervous. You know, people have been awarded. I mean, I know that in the past we've gone through applications and effectively revisited it and awarded them more. But going through applications when people have been told they're receiving housing benefit or DHP for a certain period of time, to then go back through that and potentially change that, I have to say, does make me incredibly nervous.
Point of clarification, Chair. We in terms of the DHP awards, we didn't commit beyond the end of this financial year, so we're not going back and telling them something different. We could only award the DHP for 14-15. It's not that we're changing the commitment, but it could be that we potentially significantly reduce the amount of DHP that they're getting, but there was no commitment beyond
Is that what people think when they receive the letter, though? Is that, I mean, I know there's no, it's like a lot of things, there's no commitment to pay certain things, but in the actual letter that goes out to applicants, we say you're receiving X amount DHP for a period of time. Does the letter simply say this is subject to budgets for next year, or does it actually only say this is only until the 31st of March?
Yeah, the letter does say it's only committed for this year, that it's subject to budgetary restrictions. I mean, most of these tenants that are non-size related know that we haven't committed anything beyond the 31st of March. They've had their letters saying there's no commitment made. We have some applications pending, position regarding funding. There will be, for some tenants, an expectation that, albeit they've been told that it will end the 31st of March, that they will be able to reapply and get it. I mean, there will be that undoubtedly expectation out there, but the letter is quite explicit when it says we're only committing it from this date.
Okay. In terms of a way forward, members? Yeah. Recommendation to receive, and then receive a report in June. Sorry.
Is June too early? I don't know whether June's too early. I'm quite happy. I think we should monitor it. I quite agree with you. But I'm in agreement with Ronnie. I don't think we've got any option.
Ronna?
No, we'll have a report for June. We monitor it on a monthly basis anyway. Whether we will have the full details of all, whether we've had a chance to reassess all applicants, you know, that we need to that time, but we will give you a position as at that date, but we certainly will have information.
Rob?
I suspect I'm getting nowhere with this, but the more I've heard about it and the twitchier I am about it, the more I think that we should probably be using the unallocated and balanced 371 to make up to the anticipated 1.2 and a bit in this financial year, because it strikes me we've possibly got as much as a year's worth of work to do in this to work out what we're going to do with it next. And I suspect I'm not going to get anywhere with this, but I am twitchy about this, as you say, and I think that might be a reasonable way forward.
If we did that, what would be the, you know, if we kept that same criteria and we had all that money up front, what would, how long would it last?
Difficult to tell. That it would be based on demand. I mean, it would meet what we currently know as the shortfall, but should anything happen through the year, should we get more demand, I think when talked about, I've been mentioning universal credit, potentially there's an impact here of this year should be limited. It may be very small because there's a few on housing costs, but certainly it's worth bearing in mind as well, we have no guarantee what next year's 16-17 DHP funding, DWP may cut their allocation, as may the Scottish Government. You know, so that there is always a risk attached to, you know, the ongoing funding for DHP as well. It could happen another way. There's, you know, always a possibility that it's enhanced, but that may not happen.
And there's no way we can ask the Scottish Government about any indication about if there are going to be any more cuts to their funding or anything like that, you know. They've cut it this time, but they're going to cut it again.
Kind of hoping that there won't be any allocation for bedroom tax within the next 6 months, but that's another debate. Okay, I mean, I have to say I'm incredibly nervous about this reduction. I mean, it's not something that's been caused by us, it's always been caused by the cut in Scottish Government funding, which I think we anticipated would be some reduction, but I don't think anybody anticipated a reduction from 670,000 to 104,000. I think that's way beyond what we thought. We were under the impression that we would have sufficient unallocated funds in order to cover any reduction, but it's quite clear that we don't have those unallocated funds. But I have to say I'm incredibly nervous about taking that hit of £100,000 away from initial applications. I don't know whether or not this is something we want to revisit at a future date. I mean, I think that the problem is that the challenge we've got is that where we have to identify additional funding for potentially for future years, but that's all still guesswork anyway, based on we don't know what the allocation will be from DWP and the Scottish Government. But I think taking that £100,000 hit is quite substantial.
Well, just as you said, and I mean, if we kept it the same and revisited in a couple of months or whatever, would it, you know, again, we would have less money probably at that time, but would we have more information on
that? I think the advice to members would be that I don't think we'll have any more information from the Scottish Government in 2 months' time. So in some respects, you'd just be postponing the same debate that you're having now, if it's a couple of months' time. What the Scottish Government have said is that they've allocated the DHP top-up on the basis of 80% bedroom tax mitigation, with an expectation that they'll then top up to 100%. I don't think we'll get anything other than that in the foreseeable future. That's the position, and I don't think we'll get anything else from them. But obviously, that's advice, and we'll work on the basis of what our best information, really. But there are some variables in there, as Councillor Smith has said. But in 2 months' time, I don't think we'll be coming back with a different scenario for members.
I suppose we've got two options on the table. Then we've got potential to effectively front load the unallocated funding to continue the existing criteria for the forthcoming year. But I think that we'd have to build in there.
Could we do that just now? I mean, I'd rather have, you know, if we do that, we don't know the implications of that. I don't know if we could actually do that today with the information we've got. You know, if we did front load it. I mean, if we do, you know, is there any way we could defer this and then just have have it for have that back in a month or so or whatever it is, whenever I'm probably going to be here because I'm substituting, but
how would we? What additional information would we have? I mean, as I say, much of the concern, I think, is that we don't really know how this is going to impact on individuals. We don't, we haven't got a worked out examples, if you like, of how the new criteria might work. Okay, it'll be income expenditure, but I can't picture in front of me how an individual is going to be affected by this criteria. I can't see any worked examples. I mean, is that something we could bring forward and look at in detail ahead of making a decision?
Yes, I can give you worked examples of how that would look. Difficult would have in deferring a decision is we currently have applications sitting waiting. So at this point in time, we're in a new rent year. We have not made any decisions out with size criteria about whether we can assist people or not. So while I appreciate, a desire to maybe get more information, at the moment we can't pay anybody anything out with size criteria without, knowing what level of funding we're dealing with. We can get worked examples to you, quickly, but it depends how quickly we could then get to a decision. Because otherwise, we're going to have people with rent charges who just can't make any decisions on their DHP at the moment.
Effectively, you could front load the 371,000 to deal with that, if you like, and it would be the criteria would just continue as is at the moment, and you make decisions based on the existing criteria.
Then we'd have to just say to tenants then that yes, we'll continue your DHP, but for a 2-month period. In which case we'd commit funds for 2 months, and then that would give us less of a fund to make a decision on any changes to the criteria. So we'd still be in a position where we would have to say to some tenants, if we're depending on what level of funding we actually agree.
Based on the existing criteria, and then we have an opportunity to look through, I suppose, worked examples, but that would.
I think it's a sensible way forward as well, and then if you have at the end of it.
Jane?
Well, say that we can only provide what we've proposal, which I think probably we haven't yet been in a position to do. So I think it's just a question of being honest with people. I mean, this discretionary housing payments, I mean, they have grown, haven't they? I mean, it isn't that we have always had this. They've grown. It's been given, and I'm afraid, the corollary of that is it's now being taken away, which I think is I think that's the cruelty of it. You suddenly put some money in, and then you take it away, and I don't like that. If you
Mark, because we're now halfway through.
Well, I'm not quite sure if we had got to potential consensus on this or not. I mean, in terms of what Ronnie was suggesting and yourself, although it would seem maybe not to be as practical as it maybe initially sounded. Effectively, what we're being asked to do is divvy up the unallocated money over 3 years. What I'm suggesting is that it reduces to 2 years. Now, I recognise that gives us a problem.
£1.25 million of a budget using the, so effectively spreading the unallocated funding over 2 years instead of 3 years, is that pretty much what we're saying?
Yeah, if you split it over 2 years, you basically would be adding another 63,000 on top of what we're saying. So you would bring our potential DHP budget up to 1.15 million, which is just still slightly short of what we're predicting would be committed based on last year's figures. It was spent 1.2 million, over 1.2 million this year.
Okay. And how would you manage that slight change effect?
We'd still need some criteria to do that. Go back. Well, we've said we'll put in an income and expenditure assessment. Until we actually start to go through that, what we're not 100% sure of is how many people will be knocked out with that criteria. We may find that a significant number of people that were given DHP to actually, fall under, their income is below their expenditure. You've got room to play with their expenditure, what's allowable expenditure or what's a necessary expenditure, essentially. We've got, a wriggle room with that. When we're talking about just reducing the budget slightly, we would have to look at the criteria and try some assessments to see who's being knocked out with that. It's very difficult to predict with that without actually going through all the claims at this point.
Right, so the alternative would, instead of just dividing it between the 2 years, effectively you continue with the existing criteria, and then in the next report you effectively provide members with an estimate of what that would be, and then you use the unallocated resources to fund that, basically. And therefore you wouldn't have to, and then we would, I mean, it's likely to be, tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands different. So effectively you take the 371, you front load it to the extent that we continue with existing criteria this year, and you will provide members at the next meeting with an estimate of what that budget would be and how much unallocated funding would be available for the following year. And then we've obviously got a period of time to look at potential criteria for the following year. And it may very well be that we take a decision, and I don't think we want to take this decision, it becomes a budget pressure rather than the use of unallocated funding. I think it's a ridiculous position to be in, because actually in the past, DHP hasn't cost the council money. It's been funded by the DWP. But we're in a position where the only funds available from the Scottish Government and DWP are for the bedroom tax and none for anything else, basically. But is that obviously probably a more practical way forward?
Yes, potentially. I think we still need to be clear with tenants about how much we're committing with DHP. Until we start reassessing and getting a feel for how much of the fund we're committing, I'd be uncomfortable saying to tenants, well, we're committing that for the next full year, because if that then finds us in a position where we are in a budget pressure and we're then viewing, well, how do we fund that? We may say, well, I'd prefer to say to tenants would be, well, we're committing this for 6 months. It gives us a bit of time then to see what that commitment costs, but gives us time administratively to deal with that and potentially review that. And then come back to committee with a proposal and with a more factual-based funding position for 2015-16. Because I really don't want to say to tenants, we're committing for a full year, and then come back and say, actually, financially, we're not in a position to to fulfil that promise at the start.
Okay, so we make a commitment for 6 months and we make it clear that this is subject to obviously looking at the budget. Yeah. Brilliant.
I think that's fair, and it would give us time to get a feel for what the assessment criteria potentially could be if we were to restrict funding, what the type of...
Recommendation, are members happy to note the current position regarding the Scottish Welfare Fund spend? 2.1, yeah. Okay, and happy to note the current position regarding DHP payments. Okay, members, I don't have any other business. Thank you for your attendance.